It's been 16 years since Battlefield first plunged us into epic 64-player combat in World War II with the smash hit 1942. And finally, DICE has revisited World War II with Battlefield 5, one of the most innovative and also experimental battlefields in a while. But does that equal a good game? Starting off with the campaign, it's very similar to Battlefield 1. It takes place across several different stories with different characters and settings. Each has its own theme and feel, which helps differentiate them, but ultimately I found that the missions were very dull and boring. The AI is not particularly good, and the missions feel like a bit of a disservice to the epic scale of the conflict. Most of the missions are you versus a large amount of enemies with not much assistance, and it just doesn't feel like it fits really with the Battlefield name, which is really kind of about combined arms warfare. But a lot of these missions focus on things like stealth and stuff that just feels out of place. And as I mentioned before, the AI is just atrocious. You can stand in front of enemies during stealth missions and not be seen at all, and I honestly don't even know why DICE even bothers making these campaigns, as they're just not that good. Some of the emotional story parts can be really good, but the minute-to-minute gameplay is just so boring that it's just not even worth bothering with. Now, I will say that if you did like the Battlefield 1 campaigns, then you'll probably really enjoy it, but it just wasn't really my thing. Now, multiplayer is where I spend most of my time in Battlefield, and this is where Battlefield 5 feels the most different. Starting off, DICE set a full-blown customization system with customizable soldiers like male or female, different clothing options, and all these feel really appropriate, which is very, very important. I was very worried when I first heard about it, but it actually feels good. You can choose different things like paratrooper gear, regular soldier gear, gear that fits more of a recon soldier, officer clothing. That kind of stuff really fits really well and gives you interesting, meaningful choices in how your character looks in game, and I like that a lot. Guns can also be customized, and it's not exactly the most interesting customization. You're basically choosing different camos, like putting green over the weapon, or if you want to unlock masteries, you can get like gold guns. They aren't really that interesting, but it is something to work for and something you can customize. Of course, you can even do things like long range or short range scopes and stuff like that under your customization, so there is a bit more options in that regard. Progression has changed a lot in the multiplayer, and in some ways for the better, in some ways for the worse. Basically, just like in Battlefield 1, you can level up classes, of course. In Battlefield 5, the max level overall is 50, but the max level for classes is 20. Unlocking different levels unlocks new equipment, like new gadgets like incendiary grenades, anti-tank grenades, choices between the Piat or Panzerfaust anti-tank weapons. Each gun also gets unlocked, which can then be leveled up separately for its own skill tree, so you can pick out different perks like better mobility while firing or aiming for better accuracy. It's a cool system, but not the most well balanced, unfortunately. Some of the perks are just vastly better than the others. Some guns are vastly better than others. The assault class in particular is by far the best class with multiple types of anti-tank. It's ridiculous. You can carry things like a Panzerfaust, dynamite, and then even have something like an anti-tank grenade. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It's absolute nonsense just how powerful you can make some of these classes. Medics feel the weakest right now, and recon is kind of hit or miss, with some maps working really well and others not. Ultimately, they just really need to work on this balance because the assault class is just way too powerful compared to the others. It has some of the best guns, some of the best gadgets, even weapons that can work at long and short and medium range. It's just ridiculous. Vehicles also get their own progression system, and it's completely different than what you would find in, say, Battlefield 1, where you just get a bunch of credits and then purchase an upgrade like rockets for a fighter. Instead, it's a little bit more like something like Battlefield 3 or 4, where you unlock different things as you go. Now, I love the idea because they give you a ton of options. Like, for example, with the bombers, you get choices of different types of bombs. With the fighters, you can choose different types of guns and different abilities. With tanks, you can choose different things like an anti-tank cannon or an anti-personnel weapon to upgrade to. These things are really cool and create interesting, meaningful choices, but the balancing, just like before, is awful. The difference between some upgraded and unupgraded vehicles is just massive. Like an unupgraded bomber, for example, will have like little bombs, little anti-air defenses, whereas an upgraded bomber will have really strong anti-air guns for the tail gunners, but also a ridiculous amount of bombs. And then you have an unupgraded fighter versus an upgraded fighter, where like an unupgraded fighter is really slow, has bad repair, only has like 2 machine guns, versus an upgraded fighter that has like 8 machine guns firing at you at once and also have bombs to drop on the ground. It's just ridiculous. And then you have the balancing between the different types of fighters, bombers, and tank choices, which is just really bad. Each side gets tons of different options, like 2 different types of fighters, tons of different tanks, like the Germans have multiple different types of Panzers and even the Tiger to choose from. The British have multiple types of like Cromwells and Churchills, and that's really cool and gives you a lot of player choice. but some of them are just vastly better than the others, and as a result, there's no point even having some of these other ones if they're so bad. And then you have the Panzerfaust, which every assault class gets 2 by default as their starting gadget, and it's just ridiculous. It completely devastates tanks with little effort, even Tiger tanks, which are supposed to be ridiculously armored. And as a result, it really pushes tank players to play the smaller ones like the Panzer 38T or the Staghound for the British, which are much more mobile and quicker and can get out of situations because infantry are just way too powerful against tanks. And your anti-infantry options on the tanks just aren't very good. The machine gun isn't very accurate, and it's kind of slow, which makes it difficult to hit people. The turret's tracking speed is so slow, and the person who's the top gunner is just a sitting duck to get picked off, so they can't even really help at all. And the most comical part of it all is that the Panzerfaust does more damage than the stationary anti-tank gun does, which is ridiculous. And then unfortunately, in typical DICE fashion, the UI is pretty bad. It takes like 5 to 6 clicks just to do simple things like get in and customize a vehicle or change a vehicle out or grab a different attachment or something like that. And for some reason, DICE still hasn't figured out how to allow players to just customize vehicles between matches. You have to get all the way out to the main menu and then customize your stuff and then join back into the game, which is just dumb. Why don't they have a simple feature that has been in Call of Duty forever, allowing you to customize and change everything between matches? Now, all your favorite Battlefield modes like Conquest, Team Deathmatch, and Operations have returned, though I do have to say that Operations, which are such a core and neat feature in Battlefield 1, are not very good in Battlefield 5. Each operation begins with a paradrop operation to disable artillery guns, which then leads into the second day, and then finally the third day that concludes the campaign. Unlike Battlefield 1, it doesn't really feel like you're in an operation or a large campaign. The final battle, which takes place in a tug of war, has no real significant bonuses or negatives from those first 2 days, which makes the whole point of the first 2 maps nearly pointless. On top of that, I've run into a bug multiple times where the final day gets stuck and never ends. Now, most of my time has been spent playing Conquest, which is as good as it ever has been. The maps of Battlefield 5, I do have to say, are pretty good. They all look gorgeous and play really well, and in many ways it feels like they took old maps, like for example Tsar from the Russian DLC of Battlefield 1, and made much more improved versions, like Devastation. I do wish there was a little bit more maps though, because 8 maps just isn't enough. They've made some pretty interesting changes to the core mechanics of Battlefield 5. You can now revive anyone within your squad at a slower rate than a medic could do, which is really awesome and creates a very interesting team dynamic as you're sort of picking each other up as you're falling, running towards, and taking an objective, and I love that team play aspect of it. Squad leaders can now call in special reinforcements as well, which is really cool, like supply drops, crocodile tanks, anti-tank half-tracks, storm tigers, V1 and JB2 rocket strikes from points that are earned from performing different actions on the battlefield. This is a really cool and interesting mechanic that really incentivizes team play and working together to get these rewards, then take over an objective or get that special tank. There's also some new mechanics, like for example, tanks and half-tracks can tow AA and anti-tank guns, which is really neat. You can put them in interesting positions. It is a bit buggy though, and I do hope they fix that. Sometimes it like spazzes out when you go over a hill or a bump, and then it flies around the place, just spinning around. There's also this new fortification building mechanic. You basically press T and you get these little outlines where you can build sandbags, barbed wire, and other fortifications, and even supply stations for ammo and health. And support classes can build them a lot faster and can also do things like machine gun emplacements. I like the idea, and it creates some interesting areas, especially when you fortify a very defensive location very well, but DICE could do a better job at placing where these placeable objects are. Sometimes the sandbags and the barbed wire make no sense where DICE has placed them for you to build, and as a result it's completely pointless. And of course, like any other DICE game, the graphics and the sounds are freaking amazing. It feels like you're on the front lines of World War II as you hear the Stukas and the bombers fly around and get shot down, and you hear the engine roar and the tank fire, and just the graphics of the levels and everything is so damn good. Overall, Battlefield 5 gets a 7 out of 10. It's a well-done game that's just held back by a couple things that really drag it down. The amount of bugs is ridiculous. The fact that operations sometimes just don't work. And the poorly thought-out nature of the operations versus Battlefield 1 is really irritating. I really love a lot of the new mechanics, like the ability to revive squad mates, the new squad rewards, the fortifications, and other things that really incentivize team play, but everything else around the game just feels a bit half-baked. The balance, the progression, and other things just doesn't feel quite there. And the lack of maps at 8 really feels like a huge disappointment. This game really needs like about 10 to really feel like it's got a well-rounded composition of maps. And as a result, it gets that 7 out of 10. It's an amazing game that makes amazing strides and adds interesting new mechanics and has amazing gunplay and graphics, but it's just held back by some things like the poorly thought out designs with operations, the bugs, and the bad progression system that really just kind of hold it back.